Good morning. It's Wednesday, March 12th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 523 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Some serious confusion in the Trump White House over the last few days. Secretary of State Marco Rubio went on record the other day with reporters noting that White House hostage envoy Adam Boehler's direct engagement with Hamas hasn't borne fruit. That's a direct quote. And it appeared to be a rebuke of Boehler's dalliance with the terror group that launched the 10/7 attacks. Rubio called the engagement a one-off, suggesting that this won't happen again. But why it happened in the first place isn't entirely clear to me, nor am I clear on the strategy of dealing directly with Iran. That initiative is apparently ongoing. I sincerely hope we get some clarity on all of this. The pragmatists in the Middle East are watching, and I can say with certainty they get nervous when the United States provides a platform to their enemies. Today's guest is Lianne Pollak-David, a former advisor at the Israeli Prime Minister's office and the National Security Council. She's also a member of the negotiation team with the Palestinians and a founding partner of the newly established Coalition for Regional Security. In other words, don't try to one-up her CV. She's joining me on the show in just a few minutes to discuss her vision for the future of the Middle East, building off of the foundation of the Abraham Accords. So stay tuned for that conversation right after I share some of my own thoughts on the region today. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Jordan condemned Israel for its reported decision to block aid and power into Gaza in a bid to force the release of additional hostages. First, let's acknowledge something. Hamas has held the remaining hostages for 523 days. It's sadistic and unacceptable. And if we're to be honest, Hamas is holding all of Gaza hostage, maybe the entire Middle East. The Israelis have played by the rules. Biden restrained their actions, so did the UN. They're now trying to wait patiently as the Trump administration talks to Hamas. The belief in Jerusalem is that talking doesn't work, but pressure is effective. Got it. Still, threatening to cut off electricity, water, or aid, that's a mistake. Look, I get it. Israel released tons of food into Gaza. Nobody's going to starve. Electricity matters little because most of what needs energy in Gaza is not on the grid. Diesel will do just fine. And there's lots of bottled water in Gaza. Nobody is going to go without. So why is it a bad idea to issue these threats? First, no need to burn bridges with Saudi Arabia. But also, why give ammunition to the ICC and the ICJ who've already lodged bogus claims of war crimes? What's to stop them from doing so again, using the mere threat of collective punishment to launch another case? My advice, Israel needs to channel Teddy Roosevelt. Walk softly and carry a big stick. Stand down for now, wait for diplomacy to play out, and get ready for another round of war. Threats don't seem to deter Hamas anyway. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the IDF conducted a series of strikes in Syria. The strikes targeted military assets that belonged to the former Assad regime. Israeli jets hit radar systems, detection equipment used to build aerial intelligence pictures, and other military sites with weapons and various equipment. The IDF said the strikes were intended to eliminate future threats, and apparently there were many. According to Syrian security sources, Israel carried out at least 14 different strikes at 2 different former Assad military bases. The strikes occurred against the backdrop of sectarian violence that saw Syrian civilians slaughtered by the hundreds, if not thousands, over the weekend. On Monday, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar said that Syria's new government is pure evil. That's a quote. And it's not surprising to me. In fact, it shouldn't surprise anyone who followed HTS back when it partnered with the Islamic State under the name of the Nusra Front. Pure evil sounds about right to me. Headline 2, the IDF has been hard at work dismantling terrorist infrastructure in the West Bank city of Jenin. Yesterday, Israeli troops working with police special forces and Shin Bet agents clashed with a group of armed terrorists who had barricaded themselves in a building. Israeli forces killed 2 militants and wounded a third. Elsewhere in Jenin, soldiers from the IDF's elite Duvdevan unit killed a third terrorist who opened fire on them. Those Duvdevan guys are the ones who dress up like locals and blend in before swinging into action, Fauda style. But wait, there's more. The IDF arrested at least 10 terror suspects and destroyed 2 vehicles loaded with weapons that West Bank terrorists plan to use in attacks against Israelis. All this activity is happening under the banner of Israel's Operation Iron Wall, which the IDF launched in late January. And if you ask me, we're likely to see a lot more of this in the coming weeks and months. Judea and Samaria may even become the dominant theater in the second phase of the war, should it arrive. Headline 3, Iran, Russia, and China conducted joint naval exercises. The drills are called the Maritime Security Belt 2025. They took place in the Gulf of Oman near the Strait of Hormuz. That strait is significant because approximately 1/5 of the world's trade in crude oil passes through it every year. This was the 5th set of joint naval drills for these people since 2019. Russia and China each sent at least 2 ships to the region. Iranian state TV aired footage of the exercises, including images of sailors manning guns on ship decks, as well as footage of some nighttime live fire. Of course, the growing partnership between Russia, China, and Iran is a threat to America and the West, and it certainly seems to be a response to the recent U.S. exercise with Israel in the Mediterranean. On Sunday, President Donald Trump told Fox News that he was not terribly concerned about the naval drills. The United States, he said, is stronger and more powerful than all these guys combined. And bonus headline 4, Israel and Lebanon are launching a series of talks to resolve outstanding issues. The first issue is their land border. By way of background, Israel and Lebanon don't have a formal land border. The 2 countries are separated by the line that was drawn when Israeli troops withdrew from southern Lebanon in 2000. That line is known as the Blue Line. Yes, it's literally a line of blue barrels, as they say. 13 points along that line are still apparently disputed. The most disputed area in the region is known as Sheba Farms, which has been a favorite target of Hezbollah over the years. After a 4-way meeting with the U.S. and France, Israel and Lebanon agreed to establish 3 trilateral working groups with the U.S. One of the groups is going to work on settling the disputed land border. One will negotiate Israel's withdrawal from 5 posts that it still occupies in South Lebanon, and one will focus on the issue of Lebanese prisoners held in Israel. The talks are set to begin as soon as next month. I will note here that this diplomatic engagement is as positive as it is surprising, but let's not call it good news yet. Hezbollah is still too strong in Lebanon for my liking. They are in a position to be the ultimate spoiler, no matter what progress is made. That said, we are hearing talks right now about possible normalization between Lebanon and Israel. That is amazing to say out loud. I'm not expecting it, but let's watch. And now, the time has come for my conversation with Lianne Pollak-David, who, among her many accomplishments, is a founding partner of the Coalition for Regional Security, which works to build a new secure future for Israel and the Middle East as a whole. Let's welcome her onto the show now. All right. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Lianne Pollak-David.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, let's start with the basics. What is the Coalition for Regional Security? I see a lot of heavy hitters in the national security space from Israel on your advisory board. So tell us about this group.
So the Coalition for Regional Security is really an Israeli initiative to drive forward a new regional order and to basically be able to translate or leverage upon the phenomenal military achievements that Israel has reached over the past year and a half, and to translate those into a real regional peace or regional package deal that is now so necessary in order to counter the Iranian axis. Look, a couple of weeks before October 7th, we were all kind of looking forward to the expansion of the Abraham Accords. We saw the Crown Prince of Saudi, MBS, give a historical interview on Fox News saying that every day we're getting closer, calling the normalization with Israel the most important agreement since the end of the Cold War. We also saw Prime Minister Netanyahu speak on the stage of the UN just a couple of weeks before October 7th, talking about how important this is and how this is going to change the Middle East. I believe that we all now know that October 7th, amongst other things, was targeted in order to sabotage this route moving forward. What we are saying, over 100 top figures in the Israeli society not just from national security and diplomacy, but also from high-tech, business, academia, and economy, what we are saying is that we not only need to get back on that track right away, but we also need to leverage on the regional opportunity to solve the day after issue in Gaza, and to also provide some sort of a path moving forward with the Palestinians.
All right, a lot to unpack there. I want to get to all of it, but just for everybody's edification, who are some of these big players that you've got on your board? I mean, you've got some pretty senior former military, senior political. Just give us a couple of names.
Yeah, so a couple of names that you probably know: the head of the INSS, Brigadier Tamir Haiman. You probably know Dani Atom, former head of Mossad. You probably know Yaakov Peri, former head of Shin Bet. You probably know people like Professor Uzi Arad, former national security advisor, and his former deputy, Dr. Aran Lerman, Bob Silverman. You probably know people like business people like Erel Margalit. You probably people know high-tech individuals like Gigi Levy and Eyal Waldman. So quite a diverse group of people, former Ambassador Dani Erlon, a very good mix of not only former heads of security, former diplomats, but also, as mentioned, people from high-tech, from academia, economists like people like Yoram Aryav, who managed the finance ministry, people who know that this path is not only important for Israel's national security, but also for its prosperity, for its economy, for business, for academia, for innovation, basically for our future.
Yeah, and I think it's important when you look at that group. I mean, it is folks from the left and the right. You don't see a lot of that in Israel, where people are coming together in one voice. And so I was struck by all of that. We've talked a lot about normalization on this program, and I have to admit that after a year and a half of war, I'm not sold on the prospect of rapid transformation of the Middle East. Right? There's just a lot of anger. There's a lot of resentment. There's a lot of mistrust. So why are you and some of the colleagues that you just mentioned, why are you guys optimistic?
So we're optimistic, first and foremost, because we speak to the Saudis and others in the region. We've been speaking with them for many years. One, for example, of our founding partners, Kobi Uberman, has been doing this for over 15 years. He was probably the pioneer of this approach in Israel, and he has a network of over 1,000 people across the Middle East that he speaks to regularly. We're all part of various forums and conversations. Some of them and most of them are very informal. And we speak to them. We know what they think. We know what's necessary in order to move forward. Will it be a quick change from today to tomorrow? No, but it's definitely possible. The opportunity is there. We expected it to happen much earlier on during the war, to be honest. But it's still here, not for very long. So this opportunity, this regional opportunity to expand the Abraham Accords, to get on the normalization route with Saudi Arabia, and to leverage on this regional alliance in order to also provide for a solution for the day after in Gaza, it's here, but it may not be here for very long. That's why we very much believe that we need to capture it right away.
Understood. And I get it. Are you concerned about Egypt and Jordan? These are Israel's old school peace partners, if we can call them that. But their rhetoric and posture toward Israel, certainly over the last year and a half, has been anything but peaceful. How can we right the ship here, in your view?
So look, part of what we're seeing in terms of the public declarations is simply what they have to say in order to deal with their own public opinion. So we know the professionals in the national security arena know how to read these statements and know how to categorize them, whether they are real or whether they are needed for internal politics. But on the other hand, what we're also seeing is a reaction to what's been going on. There's a lot of mistrust in the regional system. When you're seeing ministers in the Israeli government saying extreme agendas and extreme kind of visions for moving forward in Gaza, talking about settling in Gaza, not just ideas of potentially a military regime for a certain period in order to really deal with Hamas, but settling back in Gaza and doing rallies around this and talking about transferring over 2 million Gazans, this creates a lot of mistrust. And so when we're seeing the Israeli government not being very clear about where it's heading and giving kind of stage to those extremist voices, we shouldn't be surprised when we're seeing Jordan and Egypt react upon it. And what we're also seeing is a lot of doubt from the Israeli side in those relationships, especially on the Egyptian side, what we've seen very lately. It created a lot, again, of mistrust. Are the Egyptian intentions real? Why are they so active in the Sinai? Well, perhaps they're very active there because there's a threat directly to them when we're talking about 2 million Gazans potentially having to leave Gaza. So they also need to protect themselves. And by the way, a lot of these military things that we're seeing in the Sinai, those are coordinated with Israel in the backstage. But on the other hand, we're seeing the public voice going against them. So basically, politics is taking over diplomacy on all sides, the Israeli side and the Jordanian and Egyptian side. What we need to do from the Israeli perspective is we need to be more responsible. These relationships are our own interest. It is within Israel's interest for Egypt and Jordan to be stable and prosperous. If they're not stable and not prosperous, it becomes a security threat. So we need to work with all the regional moderate partners. And yes, Egypt and Jordan are very much considered moderate partners. We need to work together and create, again, this regional coalition that is moderate, that is pragmatic, that is goes together against the Iranian axis.
Well, I have to say, I hope you're right about the intentions of these countries. I think you may be giving them more benefit of the doubt. I mean, we've seen actually a bunch of military activity in the Sinai that I think is a clear violation of the Camp David Accords. And I have to say that if the news is correct this morning and the U.S. is considering a funding cut to Egypt, that some of the assistance that we've been providing may actually be reduced. I could imagine that may inject more tension into the relationship. But let me ask you a question about the intersection of the military threats that Israel faces and the diplomatic opportunities it'd like to generate. I mean, I think I can boil it down to this: can Israel ink more peace agreements with Arab states while the Iranian threat network remains active and undeterred? In other words, does the threat of Iran, does that galvanize the Arabs and Israelis to come together? Or does the very threat of Iran looming over everybody, does that prevent peace from being forged?
I believe it should galvanize. And I think that if we captured things in the very beginning, for example, of the war, let's say, 2 weeks after October 7th, there would be a regional emergency summit of all the regional forces saying, right, now we know who the bad guys are, and we know that what was important and urgent before October 7th is even more important than urgent. Then you're probably we would have been in another place or another position during this war. But what we did see is we saw how the region acted ad hoc during the Iranian attacks. So the night of the April 14th was almost like an exemplar of what the regional system could look like. The thing is, what we need to do is we need to make this into the reality and to the former reality of the region, and not just work together ad hoc and not just on the defense side. I believe that all the regional players understand what is really on the table, what's at stake, how big the risks are, and how important it is to come together. But again, what we're seeing is that the Palestinian issue, that maybe some Israelis and probably the Israeli Prime Minister thought it should not interfere with expanding normalization and the Abraham Accords, yet again has become um, a challenge that doesn't mean that we cannot proceed, but it means that we have to cater to it. It means that we have to make some immediate decisions that have a direct implication on the ability to get to this regional deal.
All right, last question for you before I let you go. The day after, what's your group saying about the plan that Trump introduced, if we can call it a plan, or the one that Egypt floated the other day, if we can call that a plan? Or are there others? Where is your group on that?
So our plan, basically the Abraham Shield plan, suggests the following. Basically, after such a long period of military action in Gaza, and after the military achievements that we have achieved thus far, right now, the most urgent thing to do is to release all the hostages. And for that, yes, we have to close that front and end the war. And we have to basically be able to establish a technocratic government that is supported, heavily supported by the regional moderate Arab players. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are very much willing to do so if we are able to really get to closing off that front and basically the idea of pulling back. And basically through that, monitor that technocratic government will be responsible for the rehabilitation efforts and for giving all the civic society, all the civic services to the Gazan population. And we'll also monitor all the rehabilitation funds, which right now are estimated between 40 and $80 billion. This is the amount. It's something unprecedented that we haven't seen before. On the policing side, what we're suggesting is that for Arab forces to be active in Gaza in the interim period and to train up local policing forces, but for Israel to remain and to still have freedom to act by getting in and out. So not staying in Gaza, not controlling over 2 million Gazans. This is really against our interest. It would be a huge burden on the IDF. It would be a huge burden on Israel's economy and society. And it simply does not also give us any promise that the security level would be better. Now, the most important element about all of this is that through this plan, we want to see the moderate Arab countries taking an active leadership role in implementing de-radicalization plans. We call them de-Hamasification. This is what the Saudis and the Emiratis have done very, very well internally. They want to do it in Gaza. They want to lead, and we want to help them do that. And this, for us, is the most realistic plan moving forward. Of course, it's not bulletproof, but we believe that this is the only way that we can, A, get back the hostages, B, basically create an opportunity for a different path moving forward in Gaza and open up the regional opportunity moving forward.
A lot of moving parts there. Certainly would love to see that all fall into place. We're going to leave it there. Lianne Pollak-David, thank you for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you very much.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleagues Matt Zweig and Elaine Dezensky have a new piece in The Hill on the Trump administration's sanctioning of criminal networks and drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. My colleagues argue that these sanctions should be paired with a qui tam provision, allowing private individuals to sue related offenders on behalf of the U.S. government and share in the penalties. This approach, they contend, would serve to bolster existing sanctions while making sanctions enforcement more lucrative for the victims. FDD's Mark Dubowitz and Jacob Nagel have an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post urging the current administration to learn from the Obama era when dealing with Iran. They argue that negotiations with Tehran should be completely off the table until the regime meets strict preconditions on its nuclear program. Negotiating with terrorists or their patrons is a bad habit that the United States must work to break. A bipartisan problem, if I ever saw one. Lastly, don't miss FDD's event on the future of the Office of the National Cyber Director, ONCD, streaming today at 10 a.m. Eastern, moderated by Rear Admiral retired Mark Montgomery. It features former National Cyber Director Chris Inglis and John Costello, Senior Advisor to the Cyberspace Solarium Commission 2.0. Visit FDD's website to tune in to that live stream. And that's all for now, folks. If you're craving more, check out the expert analysis on our website, ftd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD, or take a peek at our Instagram and YouTube channels. And please join the special community of those who support our mission with a tax-deductible donation at ftd.org/invest. As always, we are truly grateful to our donors for helping us make this work possible. We literally cannot do it without you. Tune in Friday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief featuring American author and television host Eric Stakelback. You may have seen him on the show The Watchmen on TBN. He's a big deal, and he's a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan. If I promise not to ask him questions about the Philadelphia sports teams, I hope you can promise to tune in. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.